Professionalism at the air show this week. And I'm going to be talking about how small changes that we can make can have a real big impact on safety. Let's see, this thing was acting up earlier. Let's see if we can get it to work again. Oh, there we go. So if you don't know who the NTSB is, we're an independent federal agency. We're charged by Congress to investigate every civil aviation accident in the United States. We also do participate in international investigations if it involves a U.S. manufactured or operated aircraft. And we also investigate other significant events in other modes of transportation, including railroad, highway, marine, and pipeline, and more recently, commercial space. And so not only do we investigate these accidents, but we also determine probable cause. We issue safety recommendations to hopefully prevent an accident like this from happening in the future. We do conduct some transportation studies, and we also have a transportation disaster assistance program to assist victims and their family members who have been impacted by an accident. This is a brief overview of how we do our investigations. We've got our on-scene phase where we're collecting factual information. We do issue a preliminary report of our initial findings. For some of our more major investigations under the Sunshine Act, we could have a public hearing where we present a lot of the factual information that we've found so far. It is open to the public, so people can attend. They can't participate in terms of asking questions, but it is our time to gather additional factual information as well. We'll have witnesses. Our public docket becomes open, that's where we release all of the factual information that we've collected as a part of the investigation so far. And then we will also have a board meeting, which is where the investigators will present their findings to the board members and then can be asked questions about what we found, and then we will issue our final report and any safety recommendations. I am a part of our Human Performance Division, which is in our Office of Aviation Safety. There's 4 of us who participate primarily in major investigations, but we also participate in general aviations that maybe have more complex issues and where the regional investigators are looking for our assistance on that. We're in a larger group that involves survival factors as well, but we're 2 separate groups underneath one chief. So as I mentioned, this NTSB presentation series, we're talking about flying like a pro, and this is a part of that. So again, thanks for joining today. So what does it mean to be a professional pilot? Is it about the uniform you wear, the size of the airplane, flying, paying passengers? If you've got an official title, could be, right? Maybe when people think of professional, that's what they think about. But it really means all of us that are in this room today, if we're just out there flying for fun, and it doesn't only apply to pilots as well. It could be maintainers, it could be owners of FBOs, anybody out there in the aviation community, professionalism applies to. So, when we think of professionalism, it's about our attitude, it's about our character, it's about our dedication to improving ourselves, improving our knowledge, our skills, so that we can be a more professional pilot, maintainer, operator in the aviation community. So when we think about a professional pilot, it's someone who doesn't skip the pre-flight briefing, gets familiar with your intended route of flight before you depart. You want to know more about the weather, how it forms, how it's going to impact your flight, understanding the emergency procedures. Maybe you're flying a new aircraft. You need to get familiar with what those emergency procedures are. Being proactive about safety, thinking through those what-if scenarios, not taking shortcuts, exceeding regular minimums. Essentially, it's doing the right thing even when no one's watching. So, like I said, the NTSB, we investigate accidents, and so our most complete data right now is for 2019 because we do still have open investigations. Total civil aviation accidents at that time was just over 1,300. Majority of those, as you can see, were in general aviation, with just over 1,200. In the general aviation community, we had 233 of those being fatal accidents. And when we break down what the defining event was for these, loss of control either on the ground or in flight are the primary accidents that we see, but we also have system component failures, abnormal runway contact, fuel-related issues, or different collisions on takeoff or landing. So there's a host of reasons why we have that, but professionalism may have prevented a lot of these. They may have broken that chain, that accident or error chain that led to the accident. So, this is a U.S. Airways Express jet back in 2010, Charleston, West Virginia. They got a takeoff configuration warning on the takeoff roll, and rather than aborting the takeoff, they attempted to take off. They ended up performing a high-speed reject and went into the EMAS system. And if you haven't ever been to Charleston, West Virginia, that's what's waiting for them on the other side of that. So because the pilots didn't want to abort the takeoff, go back, reconfigure the airplane for takeoff, this is what happened, and it could have been much more disastrous. This is a Cessna 402 who landed with a crosswind that exceeded the maximum crosswind for the airplane. Here we have a Learjet that was flying into Teterboro. They were doing a circle in for landing, and we had an unauthorized co-pilot flying. The captain decided to try to salvage the unstabilized approach, ended up killing both himself and the co-pilot. Beech 100 in 2016, this pilot knowingly took off with above max takeoff weight. So ended up he attempted to take off, stalled the aircraft. Thankfully, everybody was able to walk away from this one as well. So all of these little things, right? You go, why would somebody do that? But even good pilots make mistakes on some days, and we're going to talk about the reasons why sometimes people don't act in professional manners. I think the battery must be dying on this. Oh, there we go. All right, so what prevents us from being professional? Could be our hazardous attitudes, distractions in the cockpit, distractions during our pre-flight, fatigue, drugs and medications. These are the most typical things that we see that prevent pilots from being professional. My goodness. It's about maintaining your cool when your clicker doesn't work. So have you ever thought of these, ever thought one of these things? You're coming into an airport, well, the other guy made it, so I can make it. Maybe you've thought during a pre-flight that I'll just send a quick text message or check my phone because it's ringing. Maybe you're almost to your destination, and even though weather's deteriorating, you think, I'm just gonna push through. I'm almost there. I don't wanna divert, it's too much work. I've done it before. I've run this checklist 1,000 times. I don't need to double check it. Maybe you're just so tired you want to get home. These are all common things that we all think. And it's not just in aviation, it's when we're driving our car. I'm certainly guilty of sending a text message while driving. But after I do it, I think, well, that was stupid. And so thankfully a lot of these times we get away with it, right? Nothing happens bad, but the one time that it does, we can't take it back. This is known as normalization of deviance. You may be familiar with this term. It actually came out of the investigation from the Challenger explosion many, many years ago, and Diane Vaughn defined it as it means when people, and she's talking about organizations, but it really can be just individuals as well. But when we become so accustomed to deviating from the right thing, that the wrong thing now becomes the right thing. We think it's okay. And so when we rationalize shortcuts, oftentimes because of pressures that we put on ourselves, there's no consequence. Great, now we're gonna keep doing that. And then that just becomes our routine. But there are things that we can do, and just by understanding that we have these hazardous attitudes, that's a way that we can check ourselves. When we start thinking this way, say, wait, we need to change how we're thinking. So, our anti-authority attitude, no one can tell me what to do, when really we should be thinking, nope, let's actually follow the rules. They're usually right. They're there for a reason. Maybe you're being impulsive. I need to get this done right now. I need to get up in the air. You know, that's when you need to take a step back, not so fast, think first. Maybe you feel like you're invulnerable. I've got 10,000 hours. This is never going to happen to me. But it could happen to you. Maybe you've got a macho attitude that you can do it, but really thinking that taking chances is foolish. Or maybe, you know, maybe particularly if you work for someone and they're telling you got to go fly and you're resigned to what you're being told. Sure, whatever you say. But it's really important to step in and say you can make a difference and it's time to step up and not take that flight you're not comfortable with. So there's a little thing called get home-itis, and this is that pressure that overrides common sense thinking. We want to get there so bad that good judgment goes out the window. So these are just some reports from the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System. This was 3.5 hours into a flight. The engine lost power and didn't restart. Cause of the error, turns out that it was a failure during the pre-flight because he didn't question his dipstick readings. And he had less fuel than he expected. So he ended up taking off anyway and lost engine power. So, and he cites that he'll never let get there itis override sound judgment again. And he probably never thought that anything was going to happen. But in this case, he was lucky enough to be able to write about it. Another one, this was an instructor flying with a student. He realized that he was rushing and made some errors because of that. And even though he's familiar with the get home-itis or get there-itis phenomenon, he still put that pressure on himself to find a way to get them home. You know, he didn't want to leave the airplanes at another airport overnight, so you're worried about maybe financial pressures, and all of this, you know, he realizes that get home-itis blinded him to these options. Here's something where the outcome wasn't as great. This was in 2019, a Part 91 personal flight flying from Americus, Georgia to Oshkosh. The pilot departed with another pilot-rated passenger in dark night IMC conditions, crashing 3 minutes after takeoff. They ended up getting spatial disorientation. And what we found was no flight plan filed. No, he didn't receive an official weather briefing before takeoff. Parachute system, we found the safety pin for the parachute system still in place. We knew the airplane was overdue for an annual inspection, and the pilot also had alcohol in his system at the time of the accident. Unfortunately, there was insufficient evidence to determine if that played a role, but sort of laying out a pattern here that this pilot wasn't acting in a professional manner repeatedly. So the probable cause of this accident was departing in the IMC conditions, which resulted in spatial disorientation and subsequent loss of control. And what we found contributing was that pilots and the pilot-rated passengers self-induced pressure to leave. They were trying to get to the last weekend of Oshkosh. And also the pilot's anti-authority attitude, which we saw sort of the people aren't going to tell me what to do. My airplane's fine. I can fly in IMC. Another big one that we're seeing, particularly as technology is becoming a part of our everyday lives, is non-operational use of those personal electronic devices. So sending text messages while we're doing a pre-flight, sending text messages while we're in the air, doing those non-operational tasks on a tablet, smartphone, you name it. Even doing heads down work in our airplane, which might be operational, we need to recognize that that can still distract us from understanding the situation and having awareness of what's going on in the cockpit. Non-operational communication, flying with passengers, flying with kids, whoever it is, maybe they're being distracting, particularly during critical phases of flight. It's important that we brief them beforehand so that they know when is it okay to talk to us and when isn't it okay. Maybe you have an unexpected abnormal situation that distracts you just from the basic aviate, navigate, communicate. And even personal stressors in our lives can affect. Maybe you had a fight with a spouse, maybe you've got a sick child. All of those things can affect our mental focus when we're flying, and we need to be aware of them before we get in the cockpit. This was an Air Methods flight near Mosby, Missouri back in 2011. It was a Part 135 EMS flight, day VFR. And what we found is that the pilot was engaged in many non-operational text messaging, both before and during the flight. They ended up departing without adequate fuel and ended up killing the pilot, the flight nurse, the flight medic, and also the patient that was on that aircraft. And as a part of that, we found contributing to this accident that the pilot was distracted due to his personal texting during safety-critical ground and flight operations. And we also did find that he was fatigued, which is what we're going to talk about next, which is another one of those things that can prevent us from being professional. So fatigue is something that's very common. It affects all of us. You know, even in our daily lives, this is a 24/7 kind of world now. We've always got access to information. We've got cell phones. I don't know how many of you have your cell phone next to your bed at night. I do, and if I can't sleep, I get on my phone and I'm reading, which is so bad for me, but I do it. You know, the blue light, despite what I know about all of this, you know, none of us are immune to fatigue. But you're more likely to be tired if you're awake between 2 and 6 a.m. That's what we call the window of circadian low. That's just when our natural body's tendency to sleep. And it's very hard if you are fatigued to stay awake during that time. Not impossible. We've got pilots who fly overnight all the time, truckers, you name it, but we're more vulnerable to making mistakes during this time of day. So if there's a way to delay operating during that time, it's really important. Being awake more than 17 hours, maybe you worked all day, now you're going out to fly a cross-country flight, more likely to make some errors. Just even receiving 2 less hours of sleep a night. Maybe you just couldn't sleep, something woke you up, the dog was barking, whatever it is. Getting less sleep at night, we're gonna start to see decrements in our performance, and even medical conditions. And one of the biggest medical conditions we see is actually sleep apnea. If you're not familiar with it, sleep apnea is most commonly diagnosed, if you will, by a partner, because they usually report that you're snoring a lot at night, and they finally push you to go see a doctor. And that's sort of the first sign that somebody actually has a sleep disorder, is a lot of snoring at night. So thank your spouse if you make it to the doctor and get diagnosed with sleep apnea. There's other conditions that prevent us from sleeping good, restless leg syndrome, just even having chronic or acute pain, and even the common flu. Anything stuffy nose that's going to wake us up at night, it's going to prevent us from getting that good night's sleep, and we're going to see decrements in performance. So I wanted to point out a maintenance event, because I've talked a lot about pilots, but really fatigue or any of these professionalism impacts all of us. And so this was a twilight tour sightseeing trip that lost control near Las Vegas. It did kill the pilot and 4 passengers. Maintenance work had actually been completed the day before the flight. And even there was 3 flights even before this flight, before the accident occurred. So the wreckage examination revealed a flight control input rod separated from the hydraulic servo. And this is where our structures and systems guys are amazing as they're digging through this wreckage. They were able to determine that a bolt, washer, nut, and cotter pin that should have been used to secure that rod was not located in the wreckage. We did some post-accident testing, and it did reveal that what would have caused the event to occur was a disengagement of the 4-ass servo bolt, and that was because of hardware being improperly installed, either the cotter pin not being installed at all or installed incorrectly. And so these mechanics, we actually ended up citing them, both the mechanic's fatigue and the inspector's fatigue, as contributing to this accident. So these mechanics and the inspector both were supposed to be off duty. They normally worked a shift from 12 to 9 p.m. They were asked to come in early, so they came in at 6 a.m. and worked until about 6 or 7 p.m. So they're getting up earlier than what they're used to. They didn't get the full night's rest that they normally get. They also were deserved a day off and were called in. Overtime is a very powerful tool for coming into work. And they also performed this task at the end of their day. So not only were they a little bit sleep deprived, now they're working all day and trying to do this, not a difficult task per se, but a task that is very safety critical. The mechanic missed putting the cotter pin in. The inspector who was working that same schedule also missed that the cotter pin had not been installed. And the next day we had this accident. last thing that we are going to talk about with professionalism is drugs and medications. You know, we all take a lot of medications these days, prescription and over-the-counter, and many of them have impairing effects that we just don't realize have. Antihistamines is probably the most common during allergy season. Maybe you're taking Benadryl, but that can actually have a very sedating effect on us and can affect our performance. We're actually seeing a lot of marijuana use lately. That's increasing, and so we're hoping that we're going to get some more research to better understand how that's impacting safety as well. CAMI, the FAA CAMI, Civil Aviation Medical Institute out in Oklahoma City, they did a study, been 10 years ago now, but they looked at 1,353 fatal pilots that they did toxicology testing on. 42% of those pilots had an impairing drug or medication in their system. And of those 570, 90% of those positive cases were flying under Part 91. And what we've actually seen is that increase in impairing drugs has continued. So this is data through 2017. You can see this pretty sharp increase still in potentially impairing drugs. The green line showing potentially impairing conditions, controlled substances is the purple line, and even illicit drugs, you can see that increase from 2012 to 2017. So this was a crash, Part 91 ferry flight. Pilot landed halfway down the runway and lost control. Not only did he land halfway down the runway, he also landed at the incorrect airport. Post-toxicology testing on him showed his blood alcohol content as being 0.288. This is a really obvious one. This guy shouldn't have been anywhere near an airplane. But you know, maybe you have a beer or two the night before, 8 hours bottle to throttle, we know that. The FAA allows up to 0.04 blood alcohol content before flying. I think it should be 0. I mean, why even push the limits? But you know, any little bit of alcohol is, or medication is going to impair our performance. And so we really need to understand what we're putting into our bodies to prevent something like this from happening again. So an obvious one, you know, operating while intoxicated, resulting in the loss of control. He luckily walked away. Here's another one, Kissimmee to Jackson, Tennessee. 2.5 hours into the flight, the pilot was alerted that they were getting into some severe extreme precipitation. He requested the quickest route from air traffic control, and air traffic control said, I don't have anything better for you. But he was allowed to deviate as necessary. 12 minutes later, airplane is seen spinning and descending towards the ground. We've got some of the radar track and the weather, what that was like on that day. Unfortunately, both the pilot was killed in this, but his decision to continue into adverse weather. There was actually 2 SIGMETs that had been reported. None when he actually departed. There was no SIGMETs for the area for his route of flight, but he did receive 2 in the area during the flight on the radio frequency he was on, and he chose to continue the flight. And again, instead of turning back, he was asking air traffic control for help, right? Instead of wanting to turn back, he was trying to push through, and unfortunately, he did get spatial disorientation, and the aircraft actually broke up in flight. We did find toxicology testing afterwards that he did have an amphetamine in his system, which is an impairing drug. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this stuff. So a lot of little things. Maybe you're thinking of, you know, some of these things and like, this would never be me, right? I would never do something like that. But if there's anything that I've learned being in this job, you know, the best pilots still make bad decisions sometimes. The most conscientious pilots don't run the checklist correctly. We've all made mistakes in our personal lives and our professional lives. But really, small changes, big impact. Turning off your devices. Don't let those personal electronic devices distract you. Managing your stress. That's going to have an impact on your mental capability. Monitoring your sleep habits. No one is immune to fatigue. Verifying those medications that you're taking. Check with your AME to make sure that it's okay for flying. Don't skip the pre-flight planning. You know, obviously very important. Even staying focused during the landing and the landing roll. Once you touch down, the flight is not over until you park that flight. Checking your restraints. We see lots of degradation of restraints, particularly in general aviation aircraft, either due just to UV rays, old age, just overuse. And so actually at 3:15, if you're interested in learning more about restraints, there at this stage as well, there's another colleague of mine that will be talking about restraints in general aviation aircraft. Pay it forward. Little things, making a PIREP. If you see something out there, say something. You might just help the next guy or gal flying behind you. Even something as simple as installing a carbon monoxide detector in your aircraft. Go around, right? It's not that embarrassing to go around. It's going to be more embarrassing to tell your buddies that you've got a crumpled airplane at the end of a runway. And if you see something, say something. And that doesn't just apply to yourself. But I'm thinking, if you see a colleague, if you see another friend who's out there and about to get in their airplane doing something that you know is not safe, speak up. You might just break that error chain and save their life. There's a lot you can do to educate yourself. These are all free resources that are available online on FAA safety. You've also got the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, your FAR AIM, which is going to obviously tell you regulations. Lots of advisory circulars to give you guidance on how to make better decisions, use better judgment, avoid, see and avoid. Things on medications, you name it, it's out there. Even YouTube has a lot of videos that you can watch just to help educating yourself. And that's just even the first step in doing better and being professional, being mindful how these things impact you. The I'm Safe checklist seems really simple, but how many of us do it before we get on an airplane? Asking ourselves these simple questions. Am I ready to take this flight? Again, one little step that could change the outcome of your flight, turning a bad day into a good day. So just to wrap it up, takeaways. Professionalism, it's a state of mind. It is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. Rules are not meant to be broken. They are there for a reason. Even if you think you found the perfect shortcut, it probably isn't. Trusting your gut, if it doesn't feel right, it also probably isn't. And only hindsight is 20/20. You can't take an accident back, you can't take an incident back, and so it's better to take that 5 minutes. If you taxi out and you realize you've set your transponder wrong, or you're not sure if you've run your checklist correctly, go back to the ramp, shut down, take a few minutes, and just make sure you've dotted the I's, crossed the T's before you get back out there. Because really, these small changes that we do that seem small at the time could, like I said, really have a big impact on safety. And because I was obviously having a bad morning, I forgot my business card. So if you'd like to contact me, please take a picture of this because I don't have any business cards to hand out. But that's all I have for you. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them. Thanks.